Welcome to the global interview series on hydrogen, where we slice through the buzz of what's next for the most abundant natural element in the universe and ask what tangible steps can be made in 2021 and beyond. Very happy to welcome Thomas Engelmann, Head of Energy Transition at KGAL, with us here today.
Good morning, good afternoon to everybody at Gulf Intelligence.
Thank you. Let's start off with some broad strokes. Market analysts predict green hydrogen will be cost competitive by 2030 based on the current level of effort. Is this realistic, or do you think it's too soon?
No, I believe it's realistic because of decarbonization pressure gives us a need to go this long on decarbonization. The only way how we can reduce fossil-related energy in sectors which is not related direct to electricity is we have to transform electricity to molecules. The only way how we can do it in a very efficient way is at the end green hydrogen. So from my perspective, whenever you can produce green electricity and you can use electricity, use it. Don't use green hydrogen. But if you are transforming the energy based on electricity towards a molecule, because for storage, for example, or for using with other sectors, the industry sector, the transport sector, very predominant, but also process heat. It's important that you're gonna it will be supported by molecules. The only way how you should do it then is through hydrogen. And if you have hydrogen, the two ways of, we call it the color games of hydrogen, the blue, the green. For us as an investment or a finance investor, it's very clear we would love to go the decarbonization through green hydrogen. This means we need electrolysis as an instrument, and electrolysis as a technology has to come down by costs. And we can only ramp up the electrolysis in the market by bringing the costs down in order that we invest in green hydrogen. And here we believe that in 2030, the difference towards gray hydrogen is coming to the same market competition range.
Well, that raises a couple of questions, one being mechanisms and another one being the risk of stranded assets. I'll start with mechanisms on that point. What, if you had to define them, what top three mechanisms do you think need to be in place by 2025 to make this realistic by 2030? We've heard lots of announcements. We've heard governments come out and say very openly, in the Middle East as well, the historical epicenter of fossil fuels, hydrogen is at the center of our focus. But these words need to translate into projects. And we are seeing more projects. Saudi Arabia, for example, is one, and others are doing pilot projects. But how can we push forward this narrative?
Let's say this way, if I come from the target of 2030, and at least in Europe, how much you want to reduce the CO2 emissions. I believe that European Parliament and EU Commission with Mrs. von der Leyen have to make decisions to support and stimulate the hydrogen market, not only in 2025. I think it has to be done earlier, by 2021, 2022 at least, because the ramp up of the technology has to come and goes in parallel. We as investors have to prepare our investment partners that we go into this direction. So I think 2025 is definitely too late. So the decision of a subsidy regime, or it's also possible to increase the CO2 certificates, also possible. The problem here is that very often the industry is then so much shocked if they are confronted with old technology with a just increasing CO2 regime. It potentially kills and brings unemployment to Europe. This is the reason why we believe from the investment side, it makes more sense to go the same way as we have done it with the solar modules. We have to invest into green hydrogen by stimulating the electrolysis market. We have to find the projects. The projects by itself, they don't have to be necessarily in Europe, because we have a long discussion, where is all the green electricity coming from? So we would love to invest in stable political regimes also outside of Europe, but the transformation of this energy has to come somehow to Europe, if I speak about Europe. But if you see, for example, in the Arabic countries, they have the optimum processes already available, because they come from the oil and gas industry. The only thing
and
is,
an appetite to export
and
to
the
Europe as
appetite,
well.
exactly. And this is the reason why I do believe that if the appetite comes from, let's call it from China, to produce the electrolysis, if the know-how and the technology know-how comes from Europe, together with a stimulation effect by a subsidy regime, I'm really, let's say, we have different ways of subsidy regimes, a CFD regime, for example, but I think for the next 5 to 8 to 10 years, the negative aspect of the cost difference between gray hydrogen and green hydrogen has to be compensated somehow with an instrument, in order that institutional investors have a chance to invest in. If this is happen, I think the ramp up and the scaling up of green hydrogen projects and a cost down curve will come definitely, because the market is ready.
Fear, though. Sorry, there's a fear with that word subsidies. That once you start, it's so difficult to stop. Do you think that fear will stop it happening?
I would say it's more or less a situation where we could learn from the old failures which were done. I think in Germany we have definitely made it in a very strict way, where we have now the issues how to stop the subsidy regime anymore. But if you are, for example, UK has done a very good job, I think, in the contract for differences regime. So this is a possibility. From a finance perspective, also for sure, a capex support regime is possible. The fear is for sure that at the end you are producing a non-competitive market, because you always are, let's say, be supportive by a regime, whatever it is. But on the other hand side, if you look into the energy market from a global perspective, very openly, I think if we want to shift from a fossil fuel market to a decarbonized market, so there is at the beginning of the first 10 years a certain kind of support necessary.
Safety net.
It's a safety net behavior, because for us, the more we get to market, the better it is. Because in principle, if we have a chance to invest into a market which is cost competitive, it's most attractiveness is this available, that we have that. If it's not there, we must find a certain kind of a step-by-step approach how we come to that market. And if, for example, in the green hydrogen market, we would see a huge, let's say, a technology risk, where we say, oh, it's impossible that we can scale it up like this. But everything what we learned from the green hydrogen market is very easy. What we have to do is we have to come from, let's call it handmade small 2 megawatt electrolyzers to 25, 30, 40, 50, 100 megawatt electrolyzers, because then the cost comes down and the ramp up with the products. And this gives us and gives, I think, all of the world the opportunity to swap green electricity to green molecules. And this is what we would focus. We also know that at the end, to come to that road by 2050, for example, in the meanwhile, potentially we have to work with blue hydrogen in parallel, okay? This is, okay, that's clear. However, the clear focus for decarbonization route should be to use as much as possible the natural resources of the earth in solar and wind. That means completely decarbonized primary sources, and transform it into a molecule which can be used in the already existing energy system. This could be a gas grid, okay, which can be restructured in order to use it for hydrogen as well. It's blending. We can use it for the heat market. We can use it for the feedstock, ammoniac, for example, very interesting, but very cost competitive. So here to go into that market without any kind of a, let's call it support regime, safety airbag regime, it will be very dangerous. And then what happens is, at the worst case, you stranded.
Investors run away.
Exactly. And this should not be happen. And the last word to this, if somebody comes and says, oh, we have seen the hydrogen bubble was discussed already in 2000. The biggest change, what we have now is, point one, the prices of wind and solar LCOEs came down significantly. We have not had this systematic approach in 2000, never.
No.
And secondly, our realization of climate Earth warming together with decarbonization needs is now so fundamental that we have no plan B. And this
do you ever worry that the momentum that we're seeing now with hydrogen, you touched on something, it's almost as you read my mind. I was just about to ask you about how we've heard so many big hypes and positive momentums for certain parts of this environmental conversation over the years, over the 15 years I've been covering it anyway. There's been several false runs to putting a price on carbon, or roadmaps to try and do that, or the EU ETS being expanded. And, you know, as I'm sure you've got a dozen examples as well. And you've already touched on two reasons why hydrogen now has so much more validity than it's ever had. Do you think there's a risk of arrogance in that broader stakeholders who might not like yourself, who might not know as much about the markets, see it as that's a tick box exercise that will be easy to resolve, we can get on top of that, without appreciating the complexity that was involved in getting the solar power market up and running after decades? Do you think there's a risk of the buzz hiding an arrogance, an innocent arrogance, but still, or an ignorance?
Yes, if you compare it with the solar market, and let's call it not the solar market as a general, but look at the modules. So if we looked into the modules market, which we started somehow to be really industrialized with the great support of Chinese or Asian market providers of this technology, in the, let's say, in the middle of the years 2005, 2006, we were far away from a market price, far away. But the support and the society's will to go this way lead to two effects. The Asian market was really increasingly producing solar farm modules. In Germany, our companies died. So, you know, we had the two ways of a globalized process. And this means if we start in the hydrogen market, let's say from a technology perspective, in just the way of we can do it without the, let's call it the global support, the risk of stranded asset is very high. Because at the end, the technology will be let's say, built in a way what is cost competitive. But on the other hand side, we have a huge opportunity now to go into a technology which was available since decades, but it was not used. And this gives me the clear impression that in the future, in the near future, if we do it in the right way, there is not a bubble economy we are boosting off. It's a clear transformation, because the more we invest in green hydrogen, for sure, the more, unfortunately, the oil and gas industry, or fortunately, will ramp down. So it's more or less an exchange of the two ways. And I'm not so much involved in, let's say, the Arabic markets. But if you see, if you are from an, let's say, from an investor's perspective, if you are get a lot of money from selling oil, and think about what's next, if we want to decarbonize, then with each ramp down of oil selling agreements, you have to ramp up a different commodity.
Indeed, the money has to go somewhere.
Exactly. You have to go somewhere. Otherwise, you stay on an old technology. And this is the reason why I think that now the time is right to really go that way, use the technology we have subsidized already in the past, solar and wind, and transform these, let's say, lower prices, electricity as a commodity, transform this now with the support of investors and go now the next step of decarbonization.
If you had to use one word to describe how the investors you come across feel about hydrogen markets, which word would that be?
Inspiration.
And which word? Sorry?
Inspiration.
Excellent. And which word would you have used 5 years ago?
Backend? Question mark.
Question mark. So clueless to inspirational.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say the appetite is strong.
It's really strong, and I, let's say, said already in other interviews, what is now important, the society with the governmental bodies have to give us a certain kind of a bridge that we have a right and a possibility to invest. Why? Our investors have certain requirements, so we cannot go and say we are in a casino and we just invest we do not know what's coming out. And we cannot invest in a project where we say we believe that in 10 years you are cost competitive, but in the meanwhile you are dead. So it's impossible. So the way how we can bridge the gap is that we get an enthusiastic moment of shortening the difference to market by a support regime, whatever it is, okay? The more we come to market, the less directly the instrument of the, let's say, of the support regime should be merged out from the market, okay? So
of course, yes, that's what we're talking about in implementing it, but making it optional as time goes on. So it doesn't become a crutch, it's a support, not a long-term crutch that makes the market uncompetitive.
Yeah.
If you're looking forward to 2021, a couple of the points that I would take from what you've been saying. Number one, partnerships, global partnerships are going to be key from the policy, economics, technology side of things. Number two, investors' appetite is very strong and they're inspired, they're keen to learn, they're keen to get more involved. And of course, we're talking about the European market primarily, which is generally more pioneering than some elsewhere worldwide anyway. And thirdly, that there needs to be this essential optional safety net to give investors and communities and governments as well the confidence. Is there anything else that you think that we should be looking out for this year? Is there another point that you would add to that, or do you think that's enough to deal with?
Let's say if we would not have this extra round of pandemic crisis where all our heads are, let's say, shifting around, but climate change is one of our key, let's call it, focus. We have to protect the earth from, let's call it this way. We don't have to protect the earth from getting too hot. We have to protect the human mankind that we can live at this earth. What can we do in 2021? We have to accept the clear fundamental risk of climate change.
And hydrogen is going to be critical to mitigating that.
Exactly. And we have to start now, not next year, not 2025. It's too late. If we want to do it, we should do it now. It's clear pandemic crises are coming first, but if we have handled that somehow, we must go for this climate protection, climate goal issue. Hydrogen is the key enabler. It's the key for us, what we have in hands, since decades. We have it in hands. The point is we have to use it now. And 2021 is the starting point. If we don't do it in 2021, we do it in 2022, but not later. And this is the point. If we have the options to do it anyhow, we have to do it. Why should we not do it directly now? And
if not now, then when?
Exactly.
As the famous adage goes, yes. Excellent. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. There is certainly a lot to think about, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, and many greetings to all the team.